and welcome to Season 4 of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, where we share the interesting and inspiring stories of artists, critical thinkers, thought leaders, and art professionals on a wide range of topics about life, work, society, success, failure, and the ways in which we navigate the journey. We share ideas on our inspirations and the influences that affect our lives. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I look forward to sharing the conversations that I have with artists and creative professionals across the art industry and beyond. As I travel to art fairs, gallery openings, and events within the creative industries both in the US and abroad, join me in discovering and learning about some of today's most interesting and dynamic artists and creative professionals. If you're new to the show, I'm happy to have you here. If you've been on this journey with me, welcome back. Let's get it. On this episode, I'm joined by Otobong Nkanga. I first discovered her work when I wrote about her earlier this year for the summer issue of Sculpture magazine, the leading publication dedicated to contemporary sculpture and three-dimensional art established in 1982. Through critical essays, artist interviews, exhibition reviews, and features on public art, Sculpture magazine fosters a deeper understanding of the role of sculpture in contemporary culture, continuing its mission to promote and advance the art form. Otobong Nkanga is a multidisciplinary visual artist born in Kano, Nigeria, and based in Antwerp, Belgium. Her work explores themes of memory, identity, and the complex relationships between people and their environment. Nkanga's art is deeply rooted in storytelling, using materials like minerals, textiles, and organic substances to narrate humanity's interaction with land and resources. Nkanga's work has gained international acclaim, including numerous exhibitions at prestigious institutions such as Tate Modern, Castello di Rivoli, and the Venice Biennale. In 2019, Nkanga received the Sharjah Biennial Prize and the prestigious Ultima Prize for Visual Arts in Belgium. Her ongoing project, Carve to Flow, which merges art, community, and sustainability, exemplifies her commitment to creating dialogues around ethical consumption. Nkanga's innovative work continues to influence contemporary art, promoting critical reflections on the ties between ecology, culture, and the global economy. It's fall in New York City when we sit down to talk about her newest work, a large-scale monumental installation commissioned by the MoMA in the atrium of the institution titled Cadence. The work is on view until June 2025. Let's dive into my next episode with Otobong Nkanga.
My name is Otobong Nkanga, and I'm a visual artist, also working with performance and working with various media. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. Otobong, we first connected earlier this year when I wrote a piece about you for Sculpture magazine on the eve of your win of the Sharjah Prize, which is an incredibly large prize that culminates in an exhibition, and there might be a monograph or a piece of writing attached to it. And in this moment, you currently have a show up at the MoMA that was commissioned by the MoMA in the atrium of the museum that will be up until mid-2025. Cadence. Can we start there and talk a little bit about that work?
The commission with MoMA, we've been in discussion with them, but last year, 2023, I went to visit the space at the atrium, and it was quite an amazing space, and the scale, and just trying to imagine a work within the space. But what really drew me to working in the space was one of the things was the sound, but also the walls and the way the light falls on the wall, but just hearing the kind of reverb in the sound. So it took some time to think through what I would like to make. And so the conversation really started after my visit in 2023, and then to also give a proposal. And with that proposal, to think through how to work within the space, if the work will be produced in America or in New York. And so just looking at how the work could develop and also growing with the work over time. There were many iterations of the possibility of what the work could be. But at the end of the day, my interest was really to think about what it means in relation to sound, the emotion of tears, but also that rhythm of life itself, and to be able to think of life from just the ground, from bacteria, fungus, to the way we exist in the planet, to the way we also communicate and cooperate with others and other life forms, and how that affects every life form within the planet. So it was this range of the universe, so the undergrounds and under the sea and land and people. So that was that relationship with the space, and to create this work that can give that range from emotion to very tangible things, a visual connection to things, but also a visual connection to material, and that connection between all that. I hope it makes sense.
Yes, it completely makes sense. And I think for the folks listening who are familiar with your practice and others who might be engaging with your work for the first time, and I think it's a great place to start and think about all of the nuances and the sort of branches and ways that you're thinking about things. Because and when I say branches, what I'm really wanting to illustrate there is a sense of connectivity to some sort of oneness, but this understanding that there are all of these potential lanes or all of these ways of seeing and thinking about the world that are connected to the experience of living, understanding our connection to nature. And I feel that your work does that in such a beautiful and poignant way. And it's very illustrative of all of these nuanced kind of ideas and investigations that you are uncovering within your practice. So for me, it makes a lot of sense, but it might be helpful to try to take things a little bit in a piece by piece way. And I think maybe one approach could be to just really center on some of the visual aspects of what's happening. And then we can maybe go down a path of some of the more critical and foundational ideas that you think about through your artistic practice. But maybe we can use the tapestry as an entry point for that. Can we talk a little bit about what's happening visually in that piece?
Yeah, the tapestry has many different aspects to it. And the idea of the fall and the feeling of something falling from the top right down to the bottom. So you have, at one point, you have that waterfall which falls from the top from a kind of pipe, and then it comes down to the, you have also the trees that are falling, but you also have this kind of blast. One of the things I was thinking of was also the solar flares that we were having or we've been having, which kind of affects also what's happening in the planet, in our planet. And so it's quite interesting to think of that kind of ray, or that luminosity, or that kind of intensity, and entering into our own space, and how that affects other the water beings. And so for me, it was, there were different things of thinking of how things fall, the rhythm of that, and that rhythm is also thinking of wavelengths. It's thinking of the kind of, as in French, we would say the auréole. I don't know how we would say that in English, the kind of rings of things. And so for me, it was a way of working with and thinking with these different elements. But at the same time, you have two beings standing and their hands are tied and watching all these things happen. And for me, it's an interesting way to think about the ways we are so slow in the body to react and to work with all these elements that are happening. So you have these two people standing and their hands are tied in front, looking at this gaping hole. And for me, it's interesting to think about how our bodies are slow in relation to the things that are happening around us, to the climate shift, the ecology shift, the ways we are negotiating how to engage with the landscape that is filled with invisible and non tangible matter. And so you have this gaping hole with all these particles. If you look at the tapestry, there are all these dots falling, and it's referring to these particles that are entering our bodies, getting out of our bodies, moving through space. And meanwhile, we are tied and seem to be frozen and watching things fall, watching things shift, watching the crises. And our bodies are so slow. But at the same time, that relationship to the ideas of a rhythm, and that rhythm is either slowed down or accelerated. And so I was thinking of it when I thought about the title Cadence. I was really thinking of almost like a musical score. But if we even listen to a musical score, we also think about how that rhythm is going up and the momentums of that, how something is reaching the peak and then it comes down, and had a certain wave and waves of moments of peak and the moments when it descends again. But we're watching and seeing that things are actually becoming more compressed. The wave becomes shorter, and that rhythm becomes even much more accelerated. And so that idea of almost that score and watching things almost in slow motion is like arresting an image of things happening and then throwing it onto that tapestry, and it shows a moment, almost like a frame within the multiple frames of the act of things happening.
Interesting. There's so many things that are coming up for me. It's two figures, what appears to be a man and a woman, and this sort of, I'm just thinking about the Bible and Adam and Eve and thinking about this sort of origin story of humanity to a degree. Another thing that's coming up for me is like the idea of slowing down in the way that you've described the work, this slowing down to a moment, to a second, to a millisecond, and maybe seeing many different things in a very finite amount of time. And thinking about even just the concept of that, of being able to slow down and to consider and reflect and think deeply about things, and how that's such a important or such a stark contrast to the fast pacedness of the world that we live in reality, and how it feels oftentimes that moments of being able to slow down are farther and fewer between than they have been in the past. And then I'm also thinking about just the way art has that incredible power to transform our minds and help us think and see and experience in so many different ways. And so I'd love to ask a little bit about, as you were developing this commissioned work and you were thinking about the actual space of the atrium and the large works that fall from or that are hanging from the ceiling, these dyed ropes and hand-blown glass and ceramic. How were you in the initial stages of the creation of this work, Cadence? How are you thinking about engaging with the space itself?
The space commands has a lot of, how do you say, it's so big. It's you when I came into the space, I could only just think, oh my God, what can one do in the space? At that point in time, there was the work of the other artist, Carolina. And so I was looking at the work and just looking at how she engaged with it. But what I was interested in was that I wanted a work that you're not looking at, but I want a work that you can move through it, that actually takes over your emotions. I wanted a work that you could climb up to the sixth floor and it's staring at you, or you're looking from different angles of the museum and different aspects of the work. So, thinking of just the scale of the tapestry, I was imagining being on the sixth floor. That's when you'll be able to really look and see the tapestry right at the top. So, at the bottom, you can only have an impression of what the top looks like. Once you're on the sixth floor, your eye is actually looking directly at this tapestry at the top, or the glass pieces or the sculptural pieces at the top. But I was also imagining a sound that could move through space, that could actually travel through space and also take over the space. And the way of engaging with it was to engage right from the floor to the ceiling and to take over these extreme points of the building and to connect it almost like a column that holds a beam and then is connected to the ground, and to use this kind of architectural ways of dealing with space. So there's something visual, there's something sculptural, but there's something also non tangible, which is the sound, which pierces through the skin, the ears, and uses all the other senses that we're not used to working with. And these were the things that I was interested in when thinking of that space, because the atrium is not just the atrium, it connects to all the other spaces in the museum. It connects to the floor at the bottom, it connects to everywhere. And sound is one of those things that travels in such a beautiful way and can actually feel a space deeply, even without an object. It totally feels the whole space. So these were different kinds of ways of thinking for the exhibition or for this commission here at the atrium.
I want to ask about the title of the work, Cadence, and what that means for you and to you, and how that title also communicates something to the audience and to the viewer about the work. Can you speak a little bit about that choice?
Yeah, there were different titles that had passed by my mind while making the work. And the idea of having a title that is quite open, and so it allows you to enter into the work in multiple ways. And I was really thinking about rhythm in a way, and rhythm of things, but I was also thinking about that notion of something falling. If we think of what cadence means, almost like the fall of something, like cadence, a kind of rhythmic, a kind of, yeah, in French, if I think of it, cadence is a rhythm that is on, going on and on. So like cadence des choses, it's like the cadence of things, of life. And so for me, it made sense to open it in a way that people could think of it almost as a musical score, or could think of it as the fall of something, could think of it as a rhythm. And at the same time, for example, the sculptural works that are hanging, the glass pieces and the ceramic pieces, it's actually a teardrop. So if we imagine one teardrop falling, that teardrop creates a rhythm, and that rhythm is distorted through the kind of weight and it falling. And so once we imagine that the sculptural work is actually starting from a teardrop falling and becomes this fragmented and multi-shaped object, then we can imagine also that rhythm of a teardrop falling till it finally hits the ground and creates a bang or a sound. That fragmented teardrop becomes also a certain kind of cadence, a certain kind of rhythm. And then the sound work also is falling through the different 10 channel speakers. So the way of thinking about this was to imagine what a teardrop is, the emotions of a teardrop, and to create that rhythm and that fall and that slow build up of this emotion. And the emotion could be of happiness, of grief, of anger, of sadness, and to think of the ranges of different kinds of emotion that can create a teardrop, and to break it and to fragment it into a 10 channel sound work. So I think the cadence, not only for the tapestry, but also to think of it in relation to the sound, enveloped everything quite nicely as a way of thinking through.
Incredible. Incredible. As we wrap up the episode and bring things a little bit to a close, I think it would be really wonderful if we could talk a little bit about some of the core ideas that you think about through your work, some of the things that are, and what ideas are you really honing in on in your practice? Because I think for the audience and for folks listening, after hearing all of you sharing out about this particular piece and this particular commission, it might be nice to have a deeper understanding of what are the questions that you are seeking to answer, or what are the things that you're seeking to bring to the forefront through your practice. So could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, my practice is shifting slowly, but it's still involved in thinking about the structures of things and how the world is structured and how we move through that, the emotions that are connected to that. So if we are in a place of thinking or being in a place that is, what does it mean in relation to another space that actually takes that material to build upon? So I'm very much interested in these worlds that are making holes and at the same time creating other kinds of volumes and what that means to the emotion of a place. So even if we look at this exhibition in MoMA, there are two sides to it. The side of the visual, the thinking through of relationship to land, to landscape and people, but the other side that is really much thinking about the emotions that are coming out of these kinds of places or the world itself that has flourished in a certain way. So it's not just thinking of the world in a way that is from a place of the negative spaces, but to think of it of that relationship of negative spaces and positive spaces, that relationship of emotions linked to that relationship in relation to how we negotiate our space in the world, but also thinking of the kinds of disparities that are in different parts of the world. So if we're thinking of places of extraction, how does that affect places that have benefited from that extraction? What does that mean for people that lose the economy and lose also the well being of such spaces in the world? So there are many thoughts around that, but also places of regeneration, of how to think about ways of caring for a space, for a people, for a land, for water bodies, tree bodies, and just thinking of that range of different kinds of elements, people, bacteria, funguses, all kinds of different elements that are in space, and how we live with that and how we can grow in these kinds of conditions that we have set and put in the world. So it's very wide, but I think these are the kinds of themes I'm really engaging with, and I am interested in to continue working for I don't know
Yes.
how long for, but maybe till I die, who knows. But I find it like you never know. Would die and still come back into this earth and become plant and become soil and become things again that continue the journey, the continuous journey of death and life and death. So yeah,
Mm.
it is what it is. That's the way I think about things and the way I'm interested in working. Of course, I'm always trying to think through the kinds of forms that can express things in different ways. And each time really working deeply on finding how my emotions, how the thought of a place, of a research can find the right material to engage with, to trigger our imagination and our emotions. And these are the things that I'm constantly busy with and thinking through and experimenting with.
Beautiful. I really just want to pull up a quote that is from Michelle Kuo, Chief Curator at Large at the MoMA. She says, Otobong Nkanga has changed the way we understand the earth and our place in it. Her art confronts both the beauty and the degradation of the natural world and its upheaval in the wake of industrial revolutions, resource extraction, and war. Weaving together intricate materials, images, and sounds, her monumental installation creates new ways of perceiving and feeling the massive shifts taking place in our world with heart, poetry, and wonder. I want to talk a little bit about in response to that quote, I want to speak a little bit about, in light of the fact that you are a Nigerian Belgian artist who has spent significant time in Africa, in Europe, in your home country, and continues to invest there with the foundation that you started several years ago, Carve to Flow. And thinking about the way in which Europe and living in Belgium and seeing the world as someone who is not from Europe but living there. And so there's a sense of otherness. Going back to Nigeria and seeing the effect of colonialism and the effect of resource extraction in your country. And then with all of those thoughts brewing and turning in your mind, then thinking about your approach to creating and finding these connections between us as human beings and the planet and the earth that we live on. How do you think some of those experiences of living and studying in Nigeria and then living in Belgium and maybe education that you received also in Europe and then taking a step back and looking at the world, in your view, how would you say some of those experiences have really impacted the way that you see and the way that you think?
I coming from Nigeria and also been living in Europe, living in Paris, living in Amsterdam, living in Belgium, but also traveling the world and seeing different places and understanding different cultures and ways of navigating and negotiating the space that you live in. The world has been dominated by a certain way of thinking. So even if I'm in Belgium or I'm in Nigeria or wherever I am in the world, we see that the kinds of implication and the design that has been put into many places in the world has been definitely from a Western perspective. Coming from Nigeria or coming from many places are trying to negotiate how to navigate and to be in the world in relation to those things that have been installed due to colonization. And we have a dual system. So sometimes when I go out of, or let's say when I was much younger and I left Nigeria and entering into another system, you find out that you can navigate it in a way. And you, of course, you learn other ways of navigating it because we also have a system that has been installed, let's say, by the British or in some cases by the French. What is incredible with me coming from Nigeria is that you understand systems. You don't understand just a system. And so it allows you to be able to enter onto other places in the world because you understand systems. You might not understand it fully, but you understand the belly of it because you are in a country that has had many systems in it. We've had the Portuguese, and that's why we say Shebi or Sabi. We had the British. We had different groups of people coming in, and it still lingers, and there's still elements in this society. And being in Nigeria, you realize and see all the conflict connections of all these different powers that have been within the continent, and you understand why the state of things are they are. The way it's influenced me in my work is, and I remember studying in Ife and going to visit the Yoruba Brazilian architecture, or also being in Akwa Ibom, in where I come from, and seeing the influence of the clothing. You're seeing residues of this colonial past with coming from Nigeria and living in Europe. One understands systems because of just being under many systems. So if we think of Nigeria, for example, you would have different groups of people, different states, different nations, the Yoruba nation, the Igbo, the Hausa, and these are completely different ways of interacting, different cultures within a space. Then you have the British system within that. So you know that you're working within and with different systems. And so when you come to a place like Europe, you understand it in a way, or you're much more flexible and open to understand that you are in another system, and that system is also connected to your other system that you lived in, just that it's a variant of the system that is existing where you are. So I think for me, it has helped me understand my work or the way of working and the way of thinking through connections and not through what divides, but what connects. And how these things connect. Do we live under the same sky? How do we live under this place that has maybe the same rocks, the same minerals, just that it's treated differently, is exploited differently, and it shows those that have power to be able to exploit and take out, and those that kind of have the material but do not have that economy and power to extract. But I think one of the things that really touched me was my education at the Obafemi Awolowo University and working with a professor, Agbo Afolari. And it was the first time I could imagine that my world was not as tiny as it is, because he showed us one of these pebbles, the way of arranging pebbles in the ground, and saying that this was brought in by Yorubas that came back from Brazil in the earliest or late 19th century that were able to buy back their freedom, and they came back and installed houses, built houses that were influenced by the Portuguese, Brazilian, and then Yoruba culture. So that understanding that you're not just alone in your space, but sometimes what you have within that space has been designed in time through many groups of people, made a kind of click in my head for me to understand that even though you're in different worlds, and even if we're thinking of Europe, the influence of African continent, the influence of materials, the influence of knowledges have built worlds. And so I have the right to be able to be in these different worlds and to think through these different worlds and to be able to make a work that connects these different worlds and different ways of engaging in these different places. So that I think was a very strong component of understanding that the waters connect us, the trees connect us, the sky connects us. Sand comes from many parts of the world comes before you even hold it in your hand. It's been eroding and being eroded by different materials. And then it arrives at your feet at that point in time, but it's on a journey. Everything is on a journey. And so for me, that has been a very important way of navigating through different places and spaces in the world, knowing that we are on a journey, just like every particle, the wind, water, it's in movement. We are in movement.
Beautiful. I think that we have had an incredible episode here, really rich. Otobong Nkanga, I want to thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. It's wonderful to just chat with you again, to talk to you again after some time, and to really think about the things and the ideas that you're presenting in this new monumental work on view now at the MoMA until later in 2025. Thank you again so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. And it's really an honor talking with you. It's been really a pleasure having this conversation. And I hope we can continue this conversation in the future on other projects and other things. Thank you so much, really.
That was my episode with Otobong Nkanga. I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Otobong for joining me on the show. And it's a wrap, folks. That was our episode of Everything is Connected, conversations on culture and current events with some of today's hottest creative contemporaries. These episodes are recorded remotely and on location wherever in the world I find myself, whether that be the US, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, the Caribbean, and more. Depending on where I am at the time of these recordings, you will hear the sights and the sounds of my local environment. I look forward to continuing these wonderful conversations with artists and creative professionals across industries with you. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and we'll see you next time. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out.